Narsai class number, I don't know what number this is. 5? Yeah, 5. Chapter 3 of the book, if you have the book and are following along, on Abraham. So, by way of quick introduction, my thought process, actually the hardest part about this book, about doing this book, was not even translating. Narsai is actually pretty easy and fun to translate once you know the language. So the translation was sort of the fun part. The hardest part, next to the introduction, which was very hard to write, but the most challenging thing that I stressed about for many, many weeks, probably months, was which of the sermons to include in this book. Because I wanted to show a lot of his thought. I can't do everything though. He has sermons on Moses. So which one do I put in the book? Abraham or Moses? And if I do Abraham and Moses, he has like a bunch on Elijah and some on whatever, all these different prophets. Well, then the whole book's going to be on the Old Testament. Well, what about Jesus? And then, so it was very, very challenging for me to like really choose. One of my parameters was I chose mostly memre that were not yet translated into English when I did the translations 2 years ago. It's annoying that now that the book is out, 3 of the sermons in here were published within the same month, also in English by another, but that's okay. It's the way life works. So Abraham, the one on Abraham was not yet published or translated into English. One of the things that I'm a little bit, my heart is a little bit heavy about, but there was no choice. There was not really any solution at the time. The crucifixion and resurrection are such essential things for Narsai, but all of those were already translated by a Jesuit named MacLeod many decades ago, and that book's very available. You can just download a PDF and read it. So like, okay, I didn't want to redo this guy's work, even though it's such a central thing, so I tried to stress it in the introduction. So when we get to the New Testament memre, I'm going to sort of insert some of the ideas that are there in the memre on crucifixion, resurrection, that sort of time of Christ's life. Good? So hopefully in the lectures, I'll be able to add the stuff that's not directly in the memre that we're talking about. Good? Okay. That'll give us a kind of good bird's eye view of what's going on in Narsai's theology. So today on Abraham, it is about the calling of Abraham and him leaving. In the Bible it says Ur of the Chaldeans. In Narsai he just says Babylon, which is kind of funny. We'll talk about kind of what that might indicate when we get there. But Abraham's calling to leave his own people and to start a new people, why that happened, why God did that, and what it means. And the way that Narsai reads it is actually the opposite of what you might expect. And we're going to talk about that in a second. And then it goes through Abraham's, God's calling Abraham or asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac and what's going on with that. So this memre is about those two things. First, if you did the homework and read this, you will probably have noticed as you were reading it, it gets a little boring. Narsai talks and he says, Abraham did this. And and then he kind of says the same thing again in different words. And then Abraham did this. And then Abraham did this. And it's like, we get it. And then like, who cares? Like, okay, God, and then Abraham, like, God has the stuff, and then he left. Okay, like we know that. And Narsai just repeating the stuff that we already know from the Bible for a long time. And you, as a reader in the 21st century in America, where what we're used to is Twitter and TikTok, and get to the point, and if you don't have, like even in our Qurbana media shows, we'll get like, what do we get, like maybe 800 views tops on the actual podcast of Feeding Fathers. But then the little shorts that are like a minute long, we get 20,000, 30,000 easily. Why? Because you guys have no attention span. Neither do I. Okay? Narsai is the opposite. He wants to sit and just like, I just want to think about this. Abraham was called from his city. You and I are going to say, okay, then what? Then what? Then what? Narsai is going to say, no. Abraham was called from his city. He was called to leave his city. Just stop for a second and think about that. Let that settle in your brain. We're not used to that. We're not good at it at all. Narsai is very good at it. And when you take somebody like me with my Twitter brain and make me sit and read Narsai with his opposite of Twitter brain, it's very jarring in a good way. It's formative to our brains, forces us to slow down, okay? And just reflect, just pay attention. Another thing that he does, which maybe you and I are not comfortable with, is he's just perfectly happy stating a fact and letting that fact speak for itself. And when he says, Abraham, whatever, I'm just going to keep repeating the same way. Abraham left his people. You and I are going to say, like if we were in this class, we'd raise our hand and say, in 30 seconds, can you tell me what that means? What's the meaning of it? We want to know the meaning of it. Narsai, what do you mean the meaning of it? He left his people. It's a fact. It is a concrete fact. That's the thing that happened. That's the thing that's worth thinking about. But what does it mean? We want the meaning right away. Like we're not happy eating just a fruit. We have to juice it. I want to juice it. What's the juice? No, forget about the juice. The fact is the interesting thing. Not what it means. What it means is an interpretive issue. You're doing theology. That's great. You can do that later, but let the fact settle in your brain first. And that's why the spirituality of our church is when we get to really important events, we don't do much theology. In our liturgy, like in our prayers and stuff like that, when you get to Holy Week, there's not much theology in the Holy Week. Because why? That's not the time to do theology. Jesus died on the cross. Just stop and just think about that. What do you mean theology? This is not the time for felsofa in Chaldean. Just let the fact sit and settle. That's what Narsai does. And that's why sometimes he's very unsettling and a little bit annoying to read. Not because he's annoying, but because we are. Okay? So let that kind of bend your heart a little bit as we work through this. So that's one really kind of remarkable or interesting thing about this memre from our perspective as readers. Now let me get into the memre itself. Here's the first couple lines. I'm on page 94, lines 1 and 2. The Lord of creation chose one people to be his own, and through it he taught his great power to all the nations. Right away, let's get some vocab. Okay, this is fine. So we have the people, meaning the Jews. This is a technical term, and the Aramaic word is amma. Okay? Now, very often, it's not the only way he phrases it, but very often he will contrapose this, he will contrast this with the peoples meaning the pagan nations. And it's amme with siame. So it's basically the same word, but one is singular and one is plural. There's a relevance to this because Narsai is not going to see the story of Abraham as, look at how great this new nation is, how much greater than all other nations. That's actually not what's going on with Abraham. It's the story of Abraham, I will bless your seed, and the story of Abraham, and we're going to see this next week even more in the memre on Jonah. The story of Abraham is not about, this is one people that's so special to me and I'm going to love them more than anybody else. No. He chose Abraham to bless the entire world. So he takes a people not just to bless them, but to bless the amme, all the people. And the story of Jonah, we're going to stress that a lot, about this people rejected its calling to be a blessing for all nations. And that's really what the book of Jonah is about. Okay? When it comes to Abraham, though, why I think might Narsai be right about the text itself, about what actually happens to Abraham. Because he takes them and sets them apart, that's great. He dwells among them, awesome. He teaches them, I'm on line 10, how much he loves the sons of his house. He obliged them with sacrifices, and he gives them these laws. So what's the deal with all of the laws that the Jews eventually had, the children of Abraham eventually had? Why do they have to do all these ritual things? Why do they have to do all these special things? Because it's those special laws that make them set apart, that make them the special thing that God wants them to be. But why are they this special thing? And why is Abraham chosen as this special being among all people to be an example for everybody? So again, it's not a self-contained blessing that's given to Abraham and his children. It's a blessing that's given to them with the intention to spread all over the world. Similarly, you go back to Adam, and his command to Adam and Eve, he says, fill the earth and subdue it. Okay, fill the earth and subdue it. And then the people go to build a tower at Babylon. And what do? They actually disobey God. They're not filling the earth. They build a city that's self-contained. And they build a tower. And then when God confounds their speech and they fail at the tower, what does it say right after that in Genesis? It says, and then from there they went out to all the earth. So they fulfilled their vote. So God's eyes are always set on spreading his love everywhere, not containing it. And every single attempt to contain his love sort of within ourselves is a disobedience against God over and over and over again throughout the Old Testament, and of course including into the New. So Abraham, why are they given these laws about sacrifices? Not just for themselves, but to be an example for everybody to see, to get closer to God. Okay, but let me read a couple of these lines here. For all the peoples, Amme, line 17, he ordered and raised up rulers. But in the people he chose, Amma, he led them through his own name. This is an important part of the Old Testament, right? God resisted giving the Jews a king because he says, I'm your king. What do you mean? Everyone else has a king. You guys have me. And that wasn't good enough. And then he brings, Saul and then David. So that's one part. He did not, listen to this, line 19. He did not reject the peoples and choose the people out of malice, because that which would happen he foreshadowed and showed in the people he chose. Through one people, he wished to instruct all the peoples. That's the goal that God has. He placed the people as a foundation for the beginning of a house, and he completed the building of the peoples upon it as it pleased him. So the Jews are the foundation, but the rest of the nations are the rest of the house. It's all part of one thing. Okay. And so he plants Abraham. So he shifts metaphors here. He goes from a foundation and a house to Abraham is the root and the people are the tree. Fine, the peoples are the tree. Okay. Now, why do I think Narsai has a point in the story of Abraham? Because Abraham leaves his own people when he leaves Ur. Narsai reads that as, and it's subtle, but he sees it as a rejection of two things. One, a belief system that God was going to overcome, a polytheism, whatever you want to call it, paganism. One is he's leaving the paganism of his people, fine. But what he's really leaving is nationality itself. Abraham is leaving the idea that a country identity is the most important part of who you are. Again, it's not that I'm not trying to say we shouldn't have borders. I'm not even getting into the political thing here. But when it comes to spiritual life, our connection to other human beings. Again, if you want to govern a country, you got to worry about that stuff. That's not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is spiritually speaking. It is our connection with all the sons of Adam that is the important thing, more than a nationality is. Okay? And let me read that to where you see this. Go to line. Well, let me do this part first. Go to line 41. He did not mourn when he left his country and deserted his people. Nor was he indignant by asking why another country. The name of a vexing foreign land did not upset him. And the deprivation of love among strangers did not sadden him. He left his land by a road full of pain and suffering. And along with his body, he girt his thoughts for the sake of his Lord. He became a stranger to the fellowship of the sons of his people. So that's what Narsai is stressing. He left his people, his land, his nation. God called him to say, Don't worry about this. What I'm going to do for you is for all nations. Okay. Now let's talk about this funny, like this sort of shift in language that Narsai does from the Bible. The Bible says Abraham left Ur of the Chaldeans. Narsai just calls it Babylon, line 33. Funny, but that's what it is. And then let's go back to line 47. He became a stranger to the fellowship of the sons of his people, and he loved and held dear being in the household of his Lord. So he leaves his people. Well, who's my new family? The family of God. Interesting, right? He left Babylon. Now, this is a very funny kind of linguistic thing that happens. Babylon, what's Babylon? A fountain pouring out Chaldeanness, Chaldayutha. The heck does that mean? And he came to Haran, a mother giving birth to sorcery, Harashutha. Two things are actually happening here at the same time. This is a very kind of important, and it's important to us. I don't know if it's important objectively, but it's an important thing. The word Chaldean means the name of this people, but it also at some point came to mean certain characteristics of that people. So Chaldea were just people that lived in a certain region, whatever, but they were known for astronomy and astrology and for sorcery. And so it became kind of like a nickname for a sorcerer. Oh, you're a Chaldean. So it means both of those things. It doesn't mean just one or the other. It just can mean either one. So you'll see it in some later dictionaries. You look up Chaldean, and it actually means astronomer, which is why I'm really sure the Magi were Chaldeans, because they were following a star. But it doesn't, just because the name came to also mean as a nickname, oh, you're an astrologer or you're a sorcerer, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean a people. You know, it's like when you guys go overseas and you're at a restaurant and you're being loud and on your phone and you're picking your nose and you're rude to everybody, people are going to say, oh, that's an American. That's what it means to be an American, has certain characteristics. It doesn't mean it's not also a people in a country. Okay. I think we actually are like that overseas, right? Who's traveled a lot? Aren't we embarrassing? I think we're embarrassing as a country. Anyway. Or somebody calls you French. Oh, don't ever call me French. We all know what that means. I don't know what that means. Okay. So what Abraham's being called to do is, let's extend the house of God, which is all nations. Something very interesting is happening here. Now, now he starts to get into what is Abraham's calling in particular. Why is he doing this whole thing with Abraham, calling away from his land? He moved, line 65, in a pilgrimage among strangers to sow love and faith in a sterile land. The land is sterile. So now Narsai is going to start to kind of understand and see a symbol between Abraham and Sarah, Abram and Sarah, Sarai actually originally, and their sterileness, the fact that they can't have kids. And he's going to say that is a symbol for the nations or the peoples who are dead and sterile in their faithlessness. There's something very interesting going on here, and I think it would be easy to sort of dismiss this as whatever, he's just sort of like connecting two random things. There is something going on with children, childbearing and faithfulness. I think there's a deeper connection. I don't think it's just kind of a random symbol that Narsai is stapling, or that even the Bible is stapling two things together. I think what it is to be faithful to God is to allow yourself to be uncomfortable. And what Abraham is doing in leaving his people is he's going into a strange land where he doesn't have anything, he doesn't have any property, he doesn't know anything. And it's very hard to trust God when nothing makes sense. It's easy to trust God when everything's great and you're getting everything you want. But when nothing makes sense and it's all uncomfortable and you're like distraught, and that's when trust of God is really a virtue. That's what God is showing to all the nations through Abraham. But why is it that the nations are sterile? Why is sterility the appropriate symbol here? Go to line 118. 117. He intensified his test by the changing of countries, that all may hear that he did not weaken because of his troubles. He ran from famine to save himself in the land of Egypt, and divided his loins and plundered them for the part that was with him. He did not complain that evil men had taken the land of his seed, nor did he doubt because they had taken from him the vine of his fruits. Line 127. He lived in a corner that demons had farmed with idolatry. He's talking about Egypt here. And the fruits of his faith blossomed among the weeds. O tree that raised itself among the thorns and subdued the fruits of evil by the branches of his love. Oh, sir, okay. What's going on here? Childbearing is uncomfortable. And if you want to be comfortable and you care about your comfort more than anything else, you are going to be sterile. You're going to be fruitless. If the people that just want to be like having fun all the time, that's what the nations are. All they care about is their comfort. But if all you care about is your comfort, the last thing you're going to do is have kids. Have you ever met a kid? No offense. You're a good kid, actually. But some kids, yeah, they're annoying, right? Have you ever, I think most kids are kind of annoying, So like, raising them, and you got to change diapers and whatever. And there's a great, I'm sure it's beautiful. I don't know from experience, but I'm sure it's fine. But like, if your mind is set on your own comfort, childbearing is the last thing you're going to want to do. So I think there's a real connection between sterility and the sort of pagan lifestyle that the nations are exemplifying. Does that make sense? That also goes for spiritual children to the nuns. Okay. So, which is why a consecrated calling is not the single life. You guys see the difference? We're not bachelors and bachelorettes. To be single means to be sort of concerned with your own comfort. To be called to a consecrated life means that's the last thing you care about. Right? Okay, good. So that's one. The second thing that God is showing through Abraham and the people to the peoples, one is what I just said, be uncomfortable but bear fruit. Second, blossom among the weeds. Don't give up when things get difficult, because Abraham didn't give up when things got difficult. You still are called to be faithful, even if you're surrounded by like a volcano and a hurricane. If things are hard around you, you're still called to be faithful. You don't get to make excuses when things are difficult. You don't get to fall into sin just because your life is hard. You're still called to be faithful, even when things are hard. That's another thing that he's showing through Abraham. Okay. Then, Abraham's chilling, he's old. Sorry, Abram is chilling, he's old. Sarai is old. They're both sterile. And now God shows through them that sterility, the peoples that were sterile, can still bear fruit. So it's not the end of the world when you're sterile, and if your culture or your country or your people are faithless, that doesn't mean God gives up on you. That's really what's going on with Abraham. Abraham was sterile in his body, and yet God was able to bring fruit out of him. And the nations who were sterile and dead in their sins, God is able to bring fruit out of them, bring life from them. That's one of the second thing that's really going on with the story of Abraham. And he, in his person, in his story, is used by God to teach the people what can happen with them as well. Isn't that cool? I think it's cool. So, Abraham's chilling, he's sitting around. 3 angels show up in the form of men. 3 men show up. And you know the story. And then Abraham invites them in, and he's a good host to them. And then it becomes about Jesus. Now, as I said before, I said a few weeks ago, Narsai does not like reading something into the Bible that's not already there. And we're going to see that next week with the book of Jonah. Yeah, there's some stuff about the book of Jonah that's about Christ, but it's about Jonah mostly. Here, it's mostly about Abraham, but where do we get Christ in this? What does Narsai have in the back of his mind? And it's very clear. He actually quotes this verse a few pages from now, a few pages later. Jesus says, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. Jesus says that Abraham saw my day. So Narsai, as he's reading the story of Abraham, is going to ask himself, when did that happen? And he actually has two places where that happened, where he thinks Abraham saw Christ's day. 101, page 101, line 175. O being hidden from all and invisible, now we're talking to God, right? Who reveals himself to Abraham through the form of man. Ooh, right there we have the incarnation. God reveals himself to these three men, but it's through the form of man that God is revealing himself to Abraham. Right there. Abraham saw my day. What's my day? When God becomes man. That's what Abraham saw. O just man, Abraham, who was worthy to see mysteriously or symbolically the word of the Father who was destined to come and wear the body of man. That's where that's where Abraham witnessed a symbol of the incarnation. Three men entered the house of Abraham in this form, and Abraham spoke with one alone as if to God. So it's funny, there's three men there, but Abraham in the text of Genesis says, my Lord, singular. The word of the Father wore this form mysteriously, and Abraham rejoiced, for he saw the hidden one revealed in the flesh. So that's where Abraham saw my day. That's the first place. Abraham saw my day. There's a couple of funny things, like they ate, but like they didn't actually eat because they were angels, whatever. There's stuff like that. I'm not that interested in this stuff. There's another, I'll get to it when I get to it, actually. Then there's the whole thing with Sodom. He doesn't actually name Sodom's sin as like whatever, homosexuality or something. He's sort of, the thing that caused their condemnation, line 215, is that they lusted with the desire of the flesh for the spirits, for these like angels that had become incarnate. Take that for whatever you want to take it as. Birth and sacrifice of Isaac. Okay, so now Isaac is born. Look at line 244. 243, even the principle of the fulfillment of the mysteries to the just, so this is Jesus he's talking about, verified and spoke, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. Okay, so now we get the quote from John. Where's the other place where Abraham saw my day? In the sacrifice of Isaac. And this, Narsai actually makes a big deal out of. They're going up the hill. Isaac notices, well, you have the wood, and you have this, and you have that. Where is the lamb? Go to line 266. My God will find and prepare for himself a lamb for the sacrifice. Okay. We read this carefully. I actually have a footnote. If you go back to the footnote at the end of the book, or end note, I guess, at the end of the book, the exact same words in Narsai's original Aramaic can be translated as, my God will find and prepare himself as a lamb. Not just God's going to do this for himself. God will prepare, he will make himself the lamb. That's where Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. O mind, line 271. Oh, okay, sorry. That's something else. Okay, let me talk about this and then we'll get back to Isaac. Why is Abraham virtuous here? Now we get back to this thing. What is Abraham a sign of to the nations? Well, another problem with the nations in their comfort is their self-centeredness. Remember the Tower of Babylon thing I said? One of the ways this comes about is when we love something more than God. Abraham becomes a symbol of this as well. And the sacrifice of Isaac is about this. O mind, 271, who bound up his love with a body, the love of whose binding is untied by the love of his Lord. Now he's talking about Abraham. He's talking about Abraham. What is Abraham? He's a mind who loved this body, the son, Isaac, but he undid that. He bound his love. He's doing a kind of a metaphor here. He tied up his love with this physical being, Isaac, but he unbound it with the love of his Lord. What is the sacrifice of Isaac really about? That you have to love God even more than your own children. That's the hard lesson of Abraham. O mortal clothed with the sadness of the sufferings of the flesh, who controlled himself when the whips of love beat upon him. O athlete who held a match against himself. Abraham is fighting against himself and conquered the passions of his body by the power of his mind. What are the passions of his body? Not lust or greed, the love of his own child. What's the story of Abraham, of the sacrifice of Isaac, really about? And amazingly, Leon Cass, a professor at University of Chicago who has a commentary on Genesis, which is my favorite commentary on Genesis, he makes the same exact conclusion. What's the sacrifice of Isaac about? It's about parents having to learn to let go of their kids. And you who are Chaldean know what it means for parents to not let go of you. And how bad that can be for their soul. And so the story of Abraham and Isaac is a story of parents cutting the umbilical cord and realizing their child belongs to God. They're not their property. Hard lesson, right? And Abraham is the sort of example of this to all the nations. So it's not, now why are people so attached to their kids? One of the things that makes people attached to their kids is, I want my name to live on, my family, my legacy, my. That's what these guys care about. And what it means to receive God's blessing is, this is less important than being one people. And it's not just about you and your stuff. It's about God, who is the Father of us all. You see the challenge here and the connection between all these ideas. Okay. Then, God stops him, luckily for us. I do not desire the sacrifice of man. Stop your hand is line 282. Stop your hand from your inheritance and do not destroy him. Your sacrifice is accepted along with your will. Remember the difference between Abel and Cain and Abel's sacrifice. Abel's sacrifice, he sacrificed along with his will. Cain did it unwillingly. Here, Abraham gives his will to God. That's the important thing, not the thing that's going to die. That's not what God cares about. He cares about the heart being offered to him. Okay. Then he goes through. Oh, I'm good on time. Why am I rushing? Let me breathe for a second. Okay. Then Narsai goes through, I count 8 comparisons between Isaac and Jesus. Let me drink something and then I'll run through these. Okay. The first major comparison, a sort of overarching thematic kind of thesis statement, is this. Line 291. I do not desire that the sacrifice of man, this is God speaking, I do not desire that the sacrifice of a man be offered to me. I wish to reveal to you what is to come by what has occurred. By the sacrifice of a man, Jesus, I will someday bind up the peace of all. And I have prefigured and depicted in the sacrifice of your son the death of my beloved. If your son dies, he does not repay the debt of his species. But my son, from your seed, will unravel the authority of death by his death. I will take one from among your seed in the fullness of time, and I will make him the perfect sacrifice that forgives all. There is a lot going on in those lines. First, there is the binding and unraveling. Go back to the memre on Adam and Eve and their creation. Why is Adam the image of God? Because Adam, in his person, unites the spiritual and the physical. But when he sins against love, this binding goes away when he dies and his soul and body are separated. So the bond of love that keeps the human person as the image of God is broken by Adam's sin, and it's repaired by the sacrifice of Christ. So by the sacrifice of a man, I will bind up the peace of all. And he's prefigured in the sacrifice of Isaac, the sacrifice of Christ, that will truly unite all through the sacrifice of love. And he will unravel, so Christ is going to tie us back together by giving us eternal life, and he's going to unravel, so there's all this imagery of tying and untying, he's going to unravel the authority of death. Okay? All that kind of is happening at the same time. Now, there is something kind of funny, even in a humorous way, that's going on here. When Narsai is interpreting Jesus' words, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced, look what he's doing. He is saying, after the sacrifice of Isaac, God sat down and just verbally explained to Abraham, okay, so there's going to be this guy named Jesus, and he's going to die for our sins, and your son was a symbol of it. Abraham saw my day, according to Narsai, because God just explained it to him. Maybe. It's possible. It's a little weird. It's not really there in the text. Or Narsai is taking a little bit of kind of dramatic, what do they call that? Where you kind of do things. Liberty? Yeah, liberty. Yeah. Dramatic liberty. What was it? Artistic liberty. Yeah. He's kind of taking artistic liberty, kind of inserting this conversation where probably, he might not even believe that it happened. But he's just sort of doing a kind of poetic explanation of it. Okay. 8 things, 8 similarities. Line 299. Through the death of Isaac, I have signified the death of him who dies without dying. For he will die, but his body will not decay and show. So similarity number 1, Isaac was quote unquote sacrificed, but they didn't actually kill him. Jesus truly died, but his body didn't rot. So is that kind of a vague similarity? Yeah, but death without, a sacrifice without death, a death without rotting. Okay, close enough. There's going to be lots of close enoughs here. By the binding of the hands of Isaac, I depict the nails in Jesus' hands. That's pretty good. I think that's a pretty good comparison. Here in mystery and there in truth. He gets that from St. Paul. The Old Testament is a symbol and a mystery. The New Testament is a true thing that happened. Love and mercies toward his Lord had bound Isaac, and love and mercies for his species, for his race, will bind Christ. So that's the third similarity. What was it that bound Isaac? Abraham's love towards God. What is it that bound Christ to the cross? Christ's love for us. Pretty good. In Isaac, line 305, you fulfilled love toward my lordship, and in Christ I will show my richness and love toward all. That's sort of similar. Maybe that's the same one. But I like the reversal. He's saying to Abraham, you offered your son to me in love. I'm going to offer my son for your sake in love. It's a reversal. It's not that God is doing it for God. He's doing it for us. You see that? I like that reversal. Line 309, a male beast, so this is the ram that they found, saved Isaac through a command, and Christ will be saved from death through the hidden power that dwells in him. This is a funny kind of Narsaian thing. God is his command, according to Narsai. Sometimes Narsai will name God the command, Pogdana, as just his name for God. So the command, go and sacrifice that ram, saved Isaac's life, and Christ truly died, but it was God's command that brought him back from the dead. That's the similarity there. Number 6, line 313, I have shown you the mystery of salvation through the sacrifice of your son, for I will sacrifice one in the fullness of time. So just the idea that it's a sacrifice. Number 7. Number 6. Number 7, I have given you a mute sacrifice. Complete your will. So God has he gave Abraham the ram, the mute sacrifice, the animal that can't talk. Christ is the rational sacrifice. Okay. Then there's some Christology stuff. At the door of his body, every man will worship my nature. This temple stuff. Through goodwill, I will dwell in the headship of your seed. So God will dwell in Christ like a temple, and at the door of his body, every man will worship my name. It's all temple stuff, temple Christology. And then finally, the last one, 325, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw a ram on the mountain, which connects to the symbol upon the tree for the redemption of his son. So the ram was caught in a bush made of wood, and that bush symbolizes the cross. That's the symbols there. Okay. Finally, Narsai does this fun thing at the end, he ends a lot of memre like this. Kind of like the way a priest will give a sermon or give a homily. And at the end of the homily, he'll do some theology, whatever. And at the end, he's like, well, what can we take away from this? What can we learn from this? Finally, he gets to the lesson after whatever, 10 pages or so, right? 10 pages later, all right, what's the lesson? Well, imitate Abraham's faith, his faithfulness. And in fact, he says to line 347, if you don't have any kids and you're sterile, be patient. Maybe God will give you a kid one day. Maybe, maybe not. If you're weary, 349, may the weary among us journey in the company of his love. He journeyed a lot. He went to Egypt. He left. Or if you're weary, you know what? Don't complain the way he didn't complain. Take solace in God. Trust God. If you're rich, because he got rich at some point, may the rich gain wealth in the type of his wealth, that they may be sons of the inheritance of the riches above. And that means be generous the way he was generous, if you're rich. Then he gets oddly specific. Line 357, may rich women who possess much look upon Sarah. For when she had possessions, she served the spirits with her hands. So even if you're rich, don't be too good to serve people. Not like that. He addresses it specifically to women, so it's a little sexist, but it's a good lesson for everybody. May humility of soul, line 359, humble rich women. Again, oddly specific towards women. I think it applies to men too, but whatever. For the love of Abram did not change through the riches of Egypt. Okay. Let us denounce through the constancy of her faith those bland... Okay, this is a little funny. This is a very kind of social, cultural thing that was happening at his time, apparently. Let's denounce, as we compare Sarah and to the constancy of her faith, we should denounce those bland women who ask for a child from impure demons. Apparently, some women were so desperate to have a kid that they would turn to witchcraft to get pregnant. I actually think Chaldeans probably still do that today, right? Stop doing that, everybody. Okay. And then may the duration of her peacefulness chastise adulteress. So he says, just like she was faithful, you shouldn't be unfaithful. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, stuff like that. Through Abraham, may those who love wealth see themselves, for he distributed his wealth and humbled. So he gets to these sort of like practical lessons at the end. So that's the memre on Abraham. And we'll do Jonah next week. Yeah. All right. That's it. All right, everyone go and fill the earth and subdue it. Okay, all the way.